Yeah, I kind of want to get a stick and poke you to keep talking, because I mean, this is it, right? It's like it's over predictive. It's putting its neck out. It's saying that it's possible to do much more. It's eternal power, purely actual, necessary, independent. It's all this, and it's able to do so much. And then when we look at things like I don't know, you pick an example like childhood cancer or any evil or whatever, and you begin to kind of go, well, why is it unable to do that? You kind of mentioned in the book, and you mentioned just briefly in the conversation as well about us almost being sort of co-authors on a sort of epic adventure where you can imagine, like, I don't know, as you're talking about, I kind of imagine Lord of the Rings, right? You have these incredible scenes of worry and fear, and then you see people getting murdered and killed in battles and stuff, and then these people then come and rescue them, and they're going to go on to the next section of trying to get rid of the ring, and then the party breaks up, and there's always sort of steps within Lord of the Rings, of highs and lows, and this incredible epic tale of I guess ultimately trying to actually kind of win back goodness to the land of Middle Earth. But then at the end, Sam and Frodo are left broken. Like they're not the same as who they were to start with. They might have accomplished their goal, but actually they've been decimated by the journey. And others lost their lives along the way. And I kind of, as you were speaking, I was viewing kind of us as partakers on that story. But I guess, Josh, obviously, it'd be amazing to kind of get your take on this, and then if needed, I might push into a little bit more, because there seems to be a sort of I don't know, I guess a natural kind of problem of evil, and also like a sort of human or moral problem of evil as well. There's sort of two of these things that kind of go along, and I don't know whether we answer both of those in your book or not. I'd kind of like to get your thoughts.
I discuss both of these problems, and as I say in the book, I mean, this part on the problem of evil deserves its own book. Books, really. I mean, it's not just a small topic, and so I try to sketch some outlines of how I think about the topic. But I don't want to suggest this is at all an easy topic. In fact, I really think that wrestling with this topic is an avenue towards more understanding about fundamental reality. Whatever your view is, I mean, whether your view is a kind of broadly theistic view or broadly atheistic view, whatever your view is, really dwelling on the patterns of suffering and how they're connected, dwelling and thinking about possible goods that spring from certain types of suffering, or possible tragedies that spring out of maybe the hope of a good that doesn't actually take place, I think can give a kind of realistic insight into reality. And I say realistic there because I think sometimes experience forces us to face reality in a way that a theory doesn't do. There's something about the raw, it's like, in theory, after this event should happen, right? But until you have the experience, and it's like, okay, maybe somebody else had a great story, but I'm not having that great story. That doesn't seem fair. Maybe the great stories are selected by those who have the great stories and they tell those stories. But what about the tragedies? How does that work? How does that fit in? And just grappling with that. And this gets personal because, well, I mean, it's personal for everybody. We're all on a journey in the world. We all have experiences with this. So in the book, I try to sort cases. We talk about kind of a mere sort of logical challenge between God, or as a perfect foundation, and imperfect states. Could there be any possible reason for imperfections to emerge for some greater goods? And then I move into more of the kind of probabilistic part of this question. You know, how likely, how probable is it that there would be the kinds of suffering that we experience? And what I offer as a kind of organizational tool is what I call a story theodicy. You know, you mentioned an epic story where there are characters. And since writing the book, somebody was telling me that apparently there's this like computer program that's processed a lot of different stories to just figure out what are the patterns of stories. And it found like 6 common patterns. And these patterns had to do with a kind of rise of a character that rises up would be one example of a pattern, and then a fall, and then a rise again. Some would end in a tragedy, so it'd be a rise of a character, and then a fall, just end in a tragedy. But one of the top ones was one where you have a character that falls and then rises, and you think it's about to end, and then they fall. You think it's a tragedy. You hold it, and then they have an even greater rise later. But you hold the suspense into another scene where you can't really anticipate what's going to happen there. So you feel the realism of not knowing. It's like it's part of the story that you don't know. What do you do when you don't know? What's that like? What does love look like in this circumstance where it may literally have no effect? I think about this sometimes in my relationship with my wife, to be honest. What does love look like here where there's no knowledge that I'm going to get anything in return for this kind of love, and you really don't know, and you have to not know to experience that. And maybe what comes back is different than what you could calculate, and that's all part of it. So I talk about this, the idea that reality marches forward according to story, and that's part of story for there to be conflict and drama. In the book, when I was writing the book, I was kind of thinking about the value of the stories. Since writing the book, I've had life experiences that have helped me to kind of appreciate that it's not that we are here suffering for the sake of a great story. It's not that. It's that the stories display the characters. It's like the story exists for the sake of displaying the greatness of us and giving us opportunities to grow in our greatness. And to grow not just in ourselves, but in our cooperation with each other to create greater and greater states of reality. And so that's part of it. Of course, this isn't the whole thing, but it's a way of kind of framing the context of our lives. And I think about this sometimes in terms of like a TV. If you turn on a TV and you put it to a station that's random, it just has like the snow on the screen, just completely random. Well, the reason why it's random is because there's not any kind of intelligence that's programmed or making those pixels turn into anything meaningful. So you wouldn't expect the following to happen from a mindless, noisy snow screen. You wouldn't expect characters to randomly appear, to begin wondering how they got there consciously, and then to be embarking in these epic adventures. That you wouldn't expect that. But it seems like if instead you have mind, even like a good mind, behind the scenes, designing something, a stage, if you will, then it's not so surprising that you would have some experiences of conflict that can allow great things to emerge from there. And this is kind of a story that I would hear from people who would talk about their own journeys, how they would learn and grow from experiences. And in the cases where people feel like their soul isn't being built up or made, people talk about soul making, but they talk about soul breaking. How do you think about soul breaking? Paul Draper, a friend of mine, he's written on the problem of evil. He's one of the top philosophers in my view on this category, and very, very, like, he's got a heart of gold and a mind of, what do I want to say? He's very, very sharp the way he thinks about these things. And he brought, and just in conversation, the worry about soul breaking. And I think what I have to say is that if fundamental reality is purely good and perfect, per the arguments in the Bridge of Reason, then this gives me reason to believe that there's no soul breaking that is the final scene. That's the sort of ultimate tragedy, but that instead it's the story arc of rise, fall, even more, hold it, rise again. Maybe there's another fall later, but there's more scenes. So I do believe in, and I talk about this in my more recent book, that we are fundamentally beings that aren't tethered to our material forms. And so when our body scatters, we move to another scene, and it's not over. It's just not over. And I think without that, it would look like some things do just end tragically. And that would sort of call into question the perfect foundation. But I sort of reason in the other direction. I think, well, if the fundamental reality is purely perfect, per the arguments I gave, this gives me reason to believe, in light of my observations of evil and suffering, that our physical deaths are not the final scene for us, that there's a continuation. So here I want to kind of emphasize for some people who may be listening to this or watching this, I'm not here adding an afterlife as an assumption. I'm rather inferring that if these arguments for a perfect foundation are sound arguments, then in light of observations of evil and suffering, I have independent reason by inference from my sort of ethical intuitions together with, again, the conclusion that reality is fundamentally perfect, that there would be an afterlife. I mean, I also independently have an argument from consciousness for our beings not being tethered to material forms, but I don't need that argument, if that makes sense, for this stage of my thought.
If you enjoyed this clip, then head on over to Locals to access the full conversation right now. Supporters can access the video version, and everyone can access the audio-only version of the conversation. I'll see you over there.